Before 24 hours passed after Brian Hooker left that Bahamian police station, he was already granting interviews to the press. Facing the cameras, he insisted he could never hurt his wife, claiming Lynette was his entire world and vowed never to quit looking for her.
You want to keep looking for Lynette?
I'm going to need somebody with more authority to tell me to stop.
However, he conveniently omitted the specific words he uttered on that boat, not on April 4th, but well before this nightmare began. These were statements made to Lynette Hooker aboard the Soulmate, comments that her mother has since entered into the official public record. This video centers on those specific words, though it must be noted that Brian Hooker currently faces no criminal charges whatsoever. Following his release from custody, his legal counsel stated for the record that he categorically denies any involvement in illegal activity. He is still a suspect while the investigation continues. Therefore, nothing in this report constitutes a legal verdict. Every detail discussed here originates from named on-record sources regarding the highly specific lifestyle this couple chose to commit to together. This loud commitment involved major financial and logistical choices that are impossible to reverse quickly. It requires abandoning fixed addresses, vehicle payments, and property taxes, along with the household items collected over decades of living in one spot. Your entire existence is compressed into whatever fits inside 46 feet of fiberglass, wood, and the structural complexities of marine rigging. Survival means reading the weather like a second language and stocking enough provisions to last for weeks at a time. Partners share extremely confined quarters with minimal distractions and no real exits, enduring more proximity than most land-based couples face in a lifetime. Brian and Lynette Hooker actively chose that reality, finding their vessel in Rockport, Texas, and spending months on its total restoration. Christening the boat Soulmate, they departed the Key West docks in March of 2023, disappearing into a thick Gulf of Mexico fog. Lynette documented the moment for her audience, standing at the bow with a wide grin, shouting that they were finally leaving Key West. Only 4 months had passed, with Brian positioned behind her, handling the rigging as they navigated into the open sea together. Their digital presence, titled The Sailing Hookers, officially began the moment they sailed away into that heavy morning mist. The following 3 years of footage showcased genuine beauty, from Caribbean island hopping to experimenting with solar oven cooking in the galley. They laughed through tropical squalls while Lynette filmed manatees during snorkels and captured footage of sea turtles gliding beneath the water's surface. After every anchorage, a fresh horizon awaited. Notably, Lynette Hooker had not simply adopted this lifestyle just to satisfy her husband's desires. Darlene Hamlet, her mother, made it clear that Lynette grew up around lakes and boats, swimming and sailing since her early childhood. She was always most at home on the water, and viewers watching their videos could sense an undeniable authenticity in their journey. Here were two people, over 20 years into a marriage, completely detached from society, training their lenses on a bright, expansive world. By sharing their life with those on land, they seem to provide the answer to a question many people are silently asking. They appeared to have mastered this life, yet their final video was uploaded on March 9th, 2026. Footage showed Lynette paddleboarding in the Bahamas, observing marine life below, followed by her final social media post, a single photograph. The image depicted boats anchored in glass-calm Bahamian waters, captioned with a note saying they would not be moving for a while. It signaled they were settled and content. Yet only days after that post, she vanished from those very same turquoise waters. However, the footage omitted crucial details, as a camera lens only records what the person behind it chooses to frame. A couple documenting their maritime existence reveals only the specific portions of their reality that they feel comfortable sharing with the public. There is always a reverse angle, a version of that vessel and marriage that functioned only when the recording stopped and viewers vanished. This hidden reality is exactly what Lynette's daughter has been recounting to every news outlet willing to listen. Even Lynette detailed these private struggles to a friend through text messages that have recently been made part of the public domain. Now, Lynette's 76-year-old mother has voiced these concerns aloud, making statements that are impossible to retract or ignore. An insider who understood the true nature of their life is speaking out, raising allegations that Brian Hooker has consistently failed to address. Despite multiple interviews since his release, he remains silent on these claims, though his initial statement to Bahamian police is well known. Every detail carries weight, necessitating a careful review of the events that transpired on the evening of April 4, 2026. Brian and Lynette Hooker departed Hopetown on the Abaco Islands, navigating an 8-foot, hard-bottom dinghy toward their next destination. Their destination was Elbow Cay, roughly 2.5 miles out, where their 46-foot sailboat, the Soulmate, sat at its mooring. Brian informed police that conditions turned, citing heavy winds and choppy seas. Brian called friends Marnie and Blaine Stevenson 3 days later, unaware his every word was being recorded. When describing how Lynette entered the water, he used one specific word, bounced, claiming she simply bounced right off the dinghy. He claimed she bounced off the vessel into winds blowing at roughly 20-something knots that had surfaced without warning. He informed investigators she was wearing the engine kill switch lanyard, that critical safety tether engineered to instantly stall the motor if the pilot goes overboard. When Lynette hit the water, that tether went with her and the motor died. I do not know what she said. I only saw her, I think, maybe twice. I threw her a square flotation cushion, the kind we used as seats on the boat, right after she fell in. He claimed he tossed her a safety device. 3 days later, he repeated this in a voicemail to Lynette's daughter, Carly. His tone was cold and methodical, stating rescuers found the cushion and could narrow the search grid. He signed off, "I love you. I will talk to you later. Bye. Bye-bye." He told police he last saw his wife swimming for shore before the heavy current pulled her away and he lost his visual. Without the motor, he says he paddled the boat toward land. He drifted. He says he fired 2 flares. He claims passing boats ignored him. He reached Marsh Harbor Boatyard at about 4 o'clock in the morning, 8 to 8.5 hours after he says Lynette went into the water. The security guard, Edward Smith, was the first contact. Smith later told Fox News that Brian looked physically spent and begged for water. Smith asked where the lady was. Brian said, "She is in the ocean." Smith initially saw nothing suspicious. That 8 to 9 hour gap between the drowning and the report remains the central question driving this investigation. Detectives are scrutinizing the mathematics of those missing hours with forensic precision. Brian's narrative involves a sequence of paddling and drifting, supplemented by 2 flares that went unanswered by other boats, and eventually reaching the boatyard. Local Bahamian officials have noted the difficult sea state present that evening, but the math of that gap, a man in an 8-foot boat on a 2-mile trip, taking 8 hours to report his wife missing, is a discrepancy that investigators cannot ignore. A nautical acquaintance of the couple described the boat they were in as severely underpowered for those specific conditions. Witness Blaine Stevenson told reporters he believed the boat was not suited for what the weather became that night. Those expert opinions help investigators evaluate Brian's account of the drift. 4 days after the disappearance, on April 8th, the Royal Bahamas Police Force took Brian into custody for additional questioning based on what Assistant Commissioner Edgardo Dames called probable cause. That same night, during a police-led search of the vessel Soulmate in heavy rain, Brian Hooker, who was in handcuffs, slipped on the wet deck and went into the water. His life vest deployed, he was pulled out, he injured his knee. His attorney described the sea state that night as choppy and dangerous. Police obtained a warrant to search the boat for electronics. This included video recorders, digital tablets, and mobile phone equipment. CBS News reviewed the warrant. The language used to justify the search described those items as material evidence or containing data regarding a missing person. Investigators were not looking for accident documentation. They were searching under the legal framework potential foul play. Those devices were seized from the boat. They are now with investigators. Brian was questioned for over 4 hours. A magistrate granted a 72-hour extension. The deadline came on the evening of April 14, 2026. Prosecutors recommended release pending more investigation. Brian Hooker walked out. He remains a suspect. The Bahamian police and the U.S. Coast Guard, which has opened its own separate criminal inquiry, are both still looking. Carly Ellsworth is Lynette's daughter from a previous relationship. Brian Hooker is her stepfather. She is 28 years old, and she has been speaking publicly since the first days of the disappearance. She has spoken to CNN, NBC, and Fox News. What she has described is not the happy marriage shown on the couple's blog. Her primary question about Brian's story is not complicated. She asked CNN directly, why wouldn't he drop the anchor and search for her, or even swim to get her? Given that he was a Marine, why did he paddle the other way? If my partner fell into the water, I would be frantic and going after him. I would not just say goodbye. I would be out there in the ocean with you. At least we would be alive and together. Brian Hooker is a veteran. The argument against jumping in after Lynette would be that the motor was dead and he could not reach her. But the anchor question is separate. The vessel Soulmate was moored at Elbow Cay. A moored vessel in a calm anchorage is a fixed point. If the dinghy has no engine, the rational response is returning to the fixed point of the Soulmate where there is light. The vessel was equipped with communication gear and a stable hull meant for rescue, not for idling while your wife struggles in the water. Brian told investigators he last saw Lynette swimming for the coast before claiming a sudden, powerful current swept her away. Those specific details, her swimming with purpose, stand in direct opposition to the fact that Lynette Hooker was practically raised on the water. According to her mother, she grew up navigating lakes and spent her life on boats, sailing, and mastering the waves. This was no amateur prone to panic. We are talking about a woman who had been a confident swimmer since her early childhood. Forensic investigators are now questioning if the midnight conditions were truly unsurvivable for someone with her extensive maritime experience and physical capabilities. They are also examining why a former Marine would watch a strong swimmer disappear and choose to stay on the boat instead of diving in. She informed NBC that she found the idea of her mother simply falling overboard nearly impossible to believe. Even if that happened, she cannot fathom why he didn't immediately drop anchor to begin a search or jump in to save her. He was a Marine, trained for high-stress recovery, yet his version of events simply fails to align with reality. When NBC asked if this was a tragic accident, she stated clearly that she viewed the event as something likely pre-planned. Pre-planned is a heavy, deliberate term. It moves past simple suspicion and suggests a calculated intent that existed before the couple ever set sail. It implies a premeditated choice rather than a split-second mistake, a distinction Carly makes based on years of observing this man's behavior. She watched her mother navigate a volatile relationship with Brian for years, marked by numerous separations and a cycle of deep-seated conflict. Her use of that specific word comes from a lifetime of private knowledge, not from reading headlines or following social media speculation. She also revealed to Fox News that there was a documented history of him choking her mother and threatening to kill her at sea. Furthermore, she highlighted a disturbing detail that has largely been overlooked by the mainstream media during the ongoing investigation. She witnessed him physically assault one of his own daughters, an incident so severe it resulted in a formal court appearance. To her, he is simply repeating a violent pattern. She told CNN that in January 2026, shortly before the disappearance, Lynette explicitly told her that Brian had threatened to throw her off their boat during a violent argument back in 2024. Seeing those threats manifest into a real-world disappearance has convinced her that there is a much darker truth to uncover here. We are looking at a specific threat involving a specific vessel, told directly from mother to daughter, not a rumor or secondhand gossip. Just months before April 4th, Brian Hooker's legal team denied every single allegation, calling them completely false and maintaining his total innocence. In his own public statements after being released, Brian maintained he would never hurt Lynette and that he was a devoted husband. He claimed his sole responsibility was to protect her, and he expressed a sense of failure because he was unable to do so. He insisted he never harmed her and never would, stating that his only current goal is to bring Lynette back home safely. He described her as his entire life, claiming they were inseparable. If you are following this investigation, please subscribe to the channel now. We focus strictly on verified facts and official records while we track the developments of this active and high-stakes criminal investigation. Make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you are alerted the moment a new forensic break or legal update is announced. CBS News obtained text messages Lynette sent to her friend Marnie Stevenson in early 2024 during a very dark period. This correspondence took place while Brian and Lynette were living apart during one of their brief, failed attempts at a separation. Steve Hansen, Carly's boyfriend, confirmed to the media that the couple spent several months living in different locations before trying to reconcile. In those texts, Lynette lamented that their 21-year marriage couldn't survive even 6 weeks of living together on a cruising boat. She described the environment as unbearable and told Marnie she couldn't handle being trapped on the water with him any longer. When asked about fixing things, Lynette said the constant proximity was the breaking point and she had no intention of ever going back. Marnie and Blaine Stevenson are the same friends Brian contacted 3 days after Lynette vanished, though the nature of that call was unexpected. He didn't realize the couple was recording the conversation. As veterans of the sailing world, they understood the gravity of his every word. Marnie preserved those 2024 messages and handed them to CBS once the search for her missing friend became a national story. The idealized life the Hookers presented to the sailing community is now being scrutinized as the digital evidence reveals a much grimmer reality. It is critical to examine the Stevensons' initial statements from April 4th, as they were among the first to react to the news. Blaine Stevenson told reporters he was losing patience with how little the Bahamian police were telling them about the status of the search. He recorded his April 7th conversation with Brian, primarily to document the specific coordinates and locations Brian claimed to have visited. He wasn't intimately familiar with the Abaco Islands geography and wanted precise data to hand over to the professional search and rescue teams. He believed the local sailing community, who know these specific currents and tides, would be the best judge of Brian's story. They were the ones who could determine if his account of that night was physically possible or a complete fabrication. The timeline matched perfectly. Marnie Stevenson shared a video with Blaine, claiming they were doing everything possible to find Lynette. They avoided making any formal accusations in public, choosing instead to simply provide whatever documentation they had gathered. Those specific recordings and text threads became a core component of the evidence folder that detectives are currently analyzing. Even after sending those messages, Lynette chose to go back to Brian, ultimately returning to the Soulmate. When you look at that decision in hindsight, it aligns perfectly with the behavioral patterns that domestic violence experts have recorded. This repetitive loop of leaving and returning is fueled by a complex intersection of deep emotional bonds and shared financial ties. There was a legitimate belief that things might improve, though that hope often competed with a fear of what leaving might provoke. This is not a sign of weakness. Rather, it is one of the most consistent characteristics found in these types of dynamics. This context explains why Darlene Hamlet was so persistently terrified, especially since Lynette was secretly photographing her own injuries. She wasn't collecting these images for the police, but as a visceral way to remind herself of when he had choked her. When she found bruises on her back, she would document them, so she wouldn't forget the reality when Brian was acting pleasant. During those stretches where the weather was perfect and they were filming for their audience, Lynette needed a physical record to see. She used that footage to recall the violent version of him, effectively building a private documentation system against her own optimism. Darlene eventually admitted to reporters that she had been reaching out to domestic violence shelters for professional guidance on separating the couple. A 76-year-old woman was desperately calling crisis centers, trying to find a way to help her adult daughter leave her marriage. She described Brian as a man with two polar opposite personalities, pleasant when sober, but malicious and dangerous when alcohol was involved. He would become verbally abusive and hateful, which she noted was a fairly accurate summary of his fundamental character. He also became physically aggressive, and Darlene claimed she eventually learned exactly what conditions would cause that violent side to emerge. That level of insight comes from decades of observation, or from those desperate, late-night phone calls from her daughter. Harley Ellsworth gave a similar statement to National Broadcasting Company, describing the union as volatile and prone to conflict during drinking. That perspective reinforces Darlene's claims about alcohol being a catalyst, and it fits squarely into the frameworks used by researchers. Experts who spend their careers studying intimate partner aggression have identified this exact dynamic time and time again. While alcohol itself is not the underlying cause of the behavior, it is frequently cited as the specific trigger. It acts as the environment under which the more lethal version of an abusive partner surfaces. The marriage Lynette Hooker lived in for 25 years wasn't in a state of constant assault, but it was cyclically violent. There were periods of genuine affection and warmth, which were then followed by incidents that required photographic evidence to document. These were the events that drove her mother to call shelters. 1 month before she vanished, Lynette bought a one-way flight home. She had a plan to walk away from the boat in the Bahamas entirely and return to Florida. She never boarded that flight. Just 3 weeks after she was supposed to be safe, she was dead in the water. Darlene was blunt with Ashley Banfield, stating that because of the life her daughter led, she had been expecting that call. Every time Lynette flew back to that boat, Darlene was convinced she was watching her daughter walk toward her own death. Did she ever express that fear to Lynette directly? Her answer was no, though her husband claimed he had tried to warn her himself. This wasn't a mother being overly dramatic. This was a woman operating on a foundation of documented facts about life on the Soulmate. Darlene Hamlet eventually sat down for an interview on a specific podcast to discuss the case. She spoke with Ashley Banfield on the Drop Dead Serious program, the same journalist who has been following this story for News Nation. Banfield has been on this case from the start, but the podcast format allowed for a much more comprehensive exploration. It was far more detailed than any television appearance, and during that conversation, Darlene shared details about one particular night. She wasn't talking about a general mood. She described a physical encounter on the boat with clinical precision. The galley of the Soulmate features a specific U-shaped bench that wraps around the dining table below the deck. Darlene's description of what happened at that table was incredibly vivid, the kind of detail that only surfaces between a mother and daughter. Brian reportedly slammed Lynette down onto that bench, pinned her there, and began to compress her airway. As he was strangling her, Lynette felt something in her neck literally crack, leaving her neck stiff and immobile for days. Her mother noted that Lynette stayed on the vessel that night, though she admitted she couldn't explain the logic behind it. The next morning arrived, the morning after she had been choked on that bench, until something in her neck actually snapped. Brian Hooker occupied the space directly across from his wife in that galley, coldly detailing exactly what he regretted not doing the previous evening. I cannot account for the specific reasoning or the circumstances, yet she remained aboard that vessel through the night regardless of the danger. Come morning, they gathered her belongings together, and he even assisted in transporting her gear toward the exit point of the boat. They reached the dock, and she resided at my home for a short duration while she processed the assault. During their final exchanges on the deck that morning, he explicitly stated that he regretted his failure to complete the violent task. He openly lamented not finishing the job and throwing her body into the open water to hide the evidence. Consider the phrasing of throwing her overboard. Examine the cold logic behind those specific words rather than the emotional weight they carry today. The term finished necessitates a beginning, suggesting the violence on that galley bench was merely the initial phase of a lethal plan. The physical assault, involving manual strangulation and the audible crack of her neck, was viewed by the speaker as an unfinished transaction. It was a partial act, and the intended conclusion he articulated was disposing of her body in the ocean surrounding the boat. This method mirrors the exact circumstances of Lynette Hooker's disappearance on April 4, 2026, when she vanished at sea. These words were spoken roughly 18 months prior to the event, currently under review by federal prosecutors and local criminal investigators. Members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the United States Coast Guard are tracing potential links in this long forensic timeline. They are analyzing the direct correlation between that early threat and Brian Hooker's later account of the events on April 4th. Verbalizing intent with such granular detail regarding the location and method creates a significant forensic profile for this specific criminal case. When linked to the vessel where the subject vanished, this testimony gains evidentiary weight even in the total absence of physical remains. It necessitates a credible witness, and Darlene Hamlet has already provided this testimony on the record and before the general public. Her statements were recorded openly using her real identity, confirming that the threat to dump Lynette was not an isolated incident. Based on Carly Ellsworth's interview with Fox News, the specific warning of being cast into the sea had been voiced previously. Carly noted that Brian established a verifiable record of using this exact threat of maritime disposal during their many domestic conflicts. Use of the plural history indicates a recurring behavioral pattern rather than a singular moment of uncontrolled rage or frustration. That specific phrasing suggests the witness was exposed to these violent descriptions on multiple occasions over a long period of time. Only 90 days before her vanishing in January 2026, Lynette confessed to Carly about Brian's ongoing verbal threats. She described a 2024 altercation where he threatened her life, marking another instance where the family was alerted to his intent. This was simply the latest repetition of an established theme, and such frequency is critical for investigators building a criminal profile. Authorities weigh a singular outburst differently than a series of threats issued consistently over the course of several years. When the same individual targets the same victim on the same boat, the narrative shifts from simple anger to calculated intent. The documented frequency of these threats, coupled with the victim reporting them to her relatives, solidifies the evidence of his mindset. Because the family viewed these warnings as legitimate and precise, they now serve as foundational elements for the prosecution's legal strategy. This pattern helps establish premeditated intent and prior knowledge, which is vital when direct physical evidence of the crime remains elusive. Brian and Lynette Hooker spent 4 years inhabiting the Soulmate, turning the vessel into their primary residence and shared workspace. This vessel served as their house, and the galley where the strangulation occurred was a central part of their daily life. They shared meals in that space, feet away from the railing where Brian explicitly wished he had disposed of her body. We are not looking at a random threat in a public setting, but a violent promise within an incredibly confined geography. 2 individuals occupied 46 feet of territory where the only escape route was the deep water, and that is where he threatened her. He spoke of casting her into the sea, and she ultimately disappeared into those same waters with him as the sole witness. Consequently, those verbal threats are now the focal point for 2 separate and ongoing criminal inquiries into the suspicious disappearance. These statements were made directly to Lynette aboard the Soulmate 18 months before she entered the water from their small dinghy. She was returning to the main vessel when she vanished, leaving her husband as the only person capable of describing the final moments. Law enforcement has since executed search warrants on the boat, seizing all electronic hardware for comprehensive forensic data analysis by investigators. Data tracks threats made on that vessel 18 months before she vanished, yet Brian Hooker has not addressed these claims publicly. Though his legal counsel maintains a blanket denial of all accusations, Hooker has avoided direct comment in his post-release interviews. Despite the defense's stance, Darlene Hamlet provided a sworn-style account on a public podcast, speaking as a mother who heard the truth. This information is firmly embedded in the public record and will be prioritized by prosecutors currently managing the active criminal cases. Officials across multiple jurisdictions are tracking this history, which includes a notable documented incident from 2015. In Kentwood, Michigan, the statements provided by Brian and Lynette Hooker were fundamentally at odds. Brian offered the initial narrative to responding officers, claiming his wife had landed several blows to his face. The physical evidence at the scene included Brian's swollen, bleeding nose, which was corroborated by an outside witness. This individual reported hearing a violent disturbance before watching Brian retreat downstairs with fresh blood visible on his face. Lynette offered a starkly different version of events to the police, alleging that Brian had both punched her and compressed her airway. Officers noted in their report that she was severely intoxicated, and ultimately she was the one handcuffed and taken into custody that night. Crucially, the official record notes that Lynette showed no visible physical trauma at the time of her arrest. That 2015 incident serves as a grim blueprint for a marriage defined by mutual volatility. Darlene Hamlet later validated this assessment, characterizing the relationship as a series of extreme emotional peaks and violent valleys. When the couple was on good terms, things were perfect, but when the friction began, the situation turned dangerous. The 2015 police report remains a point of contention because the conflicting narratives ended in Lynette's arrest instead of Brian's. This outcome illustrates how a formal paper trail in a domestic situation often fails to capture the messy, dangerous reality behind closed doors. Lynette specifically alleged that she had been choked that night, yet Buddha's Bowden safely buried by the legal conclusion. This single event from 2015 serves as the first piece of a larger pattern that continued to build over the years. By 2024, the situation had deteriorated to the point where Lynette was texting friends about how dire things had become. She stated clearly that she could no longer bear to be alone with him in that environment. That same year, during a heated argument, Brian allegedly threatened to toss her from the boat, a terrifying moment Lynette immediately relayed to her daughter. Fast forward to early 2026, and we find Lynette purchasing a one-way ticket home, though for reasons unknown, she never boarded that flight. Approximately 18 months before the events of April 4th, a violent encounter took place on the Soulmate's galley bench, where Brian reportedly strangled his wife until her neck made an audible cracking sound. The following morning, he told her his only regret was not throwing her overboard right then. Then came the night of April 4th, 2026, when Lynette Hooker vanished into the dark waters from a small dinghy. Her husband remains the sole witness to her disappearance, and despite search efforts, her remains have never been recovered. This is the current state of the verified public record, a collection of facts that paint a specific picture. Whether a jury ever sees this evidence depends entirely on the progression of the ongoing investigation. The next phase hinges on the forensic extraction of data from the devices seized from the Soulmate, the potential discovery of a body, and the coordination between two separate legal jurisdictions. Brian Hooker and his legal counsel maintain a position of absolute innocence, and as of now, no formal charges have been leveled against him. Convicting a suspect requires more than just a suggestive pattern of behavior. It requires hard, undeniable proof. However, the absence of a conviction does not mean we must ignore the documented history of the relationship. The language used in the search warrant applications provides a window into the current mindset of the authorities. Investigators are legally bound to provide a magistrate with specific articulable facts that justify invading a citizen's privacy. The magistrate who reviewed the Soulmate warrant agreed that there was probable cause to believe the electronics on board held evidence of a crime involving bodily harm. That phrasing is telling. You do not use those specific legal terms when you are investigating a simple maritime accident. It is the precise language of a criminal probe, where investigators have already established a working theory of foul play. While a warrant does not prove guilt, it reveals the level of suspicion the police held even before Brian Hooker was released from his initial detention. The specifics of what was pulled from those digital devices remain under seal and away from public view. Between the digital video recorders, tablets, and phones recovered from the vessel, there is a massive amount of personal data to sift through. Living on a boat as a primary residence for 4 years leaves a significant digital footprint, including precise GPS location data and years of private messages. Every photo, every video, and every communication recorded in the lead-up to April 4th is now being analyzed frame by frame. Whether this digital trail provides the smoking gun needed for an indictment is something only the lead investigators can answer. They are keeping their cards close to the chest, refusing to comment on the progress of the digital forensics. But the hardware is in their hands, and the Soulmate's digital secrets are currently being decoded by experts with the power to make an arrest. There is one final piece of the public record that demands attention before we conclude this look at the case. In those chaotic first days after Lynette went missing, and just before his arrest, Brian Hooker took to social media to tell his story. He posted a message on Facebook claiming to be completely devastated by what he described as a tragic maritime accident. He blamed unpredictable seas and high winds for causing his beloved Lynette to fall from their dinghy near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. His statement detailed desperate but failed attempts to reach her as the currents pulled them apart, insisting that finding her was his only priority. He was very careful to label the event an accident caused by nature, not by man. These were the specific words he chose to establish his defense on the public record before the handcuffs were ever slapped onto his wrists. This narrative serves as the foundation for every statement his legal team has made since the investigation began. Experienced investigators do not accept a suspect's self-serving narrative at face value. They look for the cracks in the story. And right now, sitting behind that carefully crafted public image is a search warrant and two separate criminal investigations: forensics, a set of seized electronics, and the testimony of a 76-year-old woman claiming her son-in-law confessed to his wife. He allegedly expressed regret for not finishing the job and tossing her overboard. Lynette Hooker was only 55 years old. She was a mother who lived her life by the sea, spent decades on the coast, and chose the water for her final chapter. Her March 29th update, just days before she vanished, was pinned at Marsh Harbor, the same spot Brian arrived by dinghy. He pulled in during the pre-dawn hours of April 5th, where the Soulmate has since been searched and guarded by forensic teams. Her post treated the location like a standard anchorage, describing the Abaco Rains and the surrounding sea as nothing more than entertainment. She had no idea these waters would become the map of her disappearance, leading Darlene Hamlet to tell a podcast one thing. That message was simple: I love you, and I wish you had come home, words carrying the weight of a mother's grief. She just wanted her daughter back. The one-way ticket Lynette purchased was supposed to bring her there, but it remains entirely unused. This specific detail, perhaps more than any other forensic evidence in the file, is the heavy reality Lynette's family carries now. Brian Hooker is still stuck in the Bahamas as a primary suspect, though the Royal Bahamas Police Force officially confirmed his release. Prosecutors recommended this release while the investigation evolves. He has not been cleared, only granted a temporary reprieve from a cell. Simultaneously, the United States Coast Guard is conducting a separate criminal inquiry, having secured the electronic devices pulled from the Soulmate. Lynette Hooker remains missing, and while no charges have been filed, the public record now contains a haunting on-camera testimony. In a published podcast, Lynette's mother describes a man who allegedly looked his wife in the eye and threatened to finish her. The claim suggests he wanted to throw her overboard while on that vessel, 18 months before she actually vanished into the ocean. Brian Hooker has not addressed these allegations. The case remains wide open, and the Soulmate sits motionless at anchor in the harbor. A frequently overlooked detail in the media coverage is the Coast Guard's decision to launch their own independent criminal investigation into this. This move shifted the mission from search and rescue to a formal criminal probe operating alongside the ongoing Bahamian police inquiry. Consequently, two distinct law enforcement agencies across two different jurisdictions are now building independent criminal cases against the same person. While the Bahamas holds primary jurisdiction due to the location, the suspicious disappearance of an American citizen remains a priority for authorities. Because the incident occurred in waters near the United States, the Coast Guard possesses the authority to pursue a criminal case, and they are. Independent of any decisions made by Bahamian prosecutors, the Coast Guard's probe continues, leaving Brian Hooker to face two separate legal fronts. He is not managing one inquiry that can be easily dismissed. He is fighting two, and his public statements are under scrutiny. We have to look at what Brian Hooker actually told the media following his release, specifically his comments during an interview with CBS. He claimed his search for Lynette would never end, stating that it would take a direct order from a higher authority to stop. During his NBC appearance, Brian appeared deeply shaken, telling the cameras that Lynette was his entire life and they belonged together. Speaking with ABC, he lamented his failure to protect her, repeating that his single responsibility was her safety, and he failed. He vowed to continue his efforts from the Bahamas, announcing that he would remain in the country to oversee the search effort. Brian committed to staying until his visa expired, portraying himself to the public as a dedicated husband, assisting the ongoing search mission. This was the carefully curated image Brian projected after his release, though what lies beneath that exterior remains a mystery to everyone. Whether his display was genuine grief or a calculated performance is impossible to prove, but Darlene Hamlet's recorded words offer context. Her testimony stands in direct opposition to his public grieving, creating a jarring contradiction where a man searching for his wife threatened her. This is the same individual whose own mother-in-law went on camera to claim he previously expressed a desire to dump Lynette overboard. Both the emotional pleas and the disturbing allegations are now part of the record, and investigators are finding the link between them. Solving that puzzle is the primary objective of the two criminal probes active across both jurisdictions. Tell us your perspective in the comments. Do you believe Brian's story to the Bahamian authorities, or does the behavioral pattern prior to April 4th suggest a sinister explanation? When you consider the threats allegedly made 18 months ago, does it fundamentally alter how you view the night Lynette disappeared? Do those alleged statements shift your opinion, especially now that he is facing heat from two separate high-stakes criminal investigations? Where do you see this investigation heading? For those of you who have tracked this story from day one, what stands out? Which specific piece of evidence is the most unsettling to you? Post your thoughts below as we review every single response. Your insights and questions directly influence our deep dive follow-up coverage as we continue to track the developments in this ongoing case. If our breakdown provided a clearer understanding of the dual investigations currently underway, please take a moment to share your analysis. For those who have been monitoring this case since the beginning, tell us which specific detail keeps you up at night. Answer below. We rely on your feedback for our continued reporting on cases like this, so let us know if this verified overview helped. To follow the Lynette Hooker case, subscribe now. We build these segments using only the verified evidentiary record. We provide zero conjecture, disguised as truth, and no premature judgment, relying strictly on the official statements of identified, named sources. Subscribe and enable all notifications to remain updated as this legal situation develops. The Hooker family requires this investigation to remain public, and your subscription is the primary way we ensure that. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and your entire family. We are calling for a meticulous and exhaustive investigation into the events that occurred within the Abaco Islands, whatever they were. Darlene, I appreciate you sharing these details. If there is anything we can do, please let us know. Absolutely.